Truth is, I'm glad you've come. I wish to speak to you about my inheritance.
What inheritance?
Lady Rhea and I had no heirs. As her husband, whatever she was due now passes to me. She stood to inherit all of Runestone. Did she not?
But what if they did? I feel the question of what could have been had Daemon actually done his duty with his first wife is a question that's been asked and considered a bit more now online after we actually got to see the Lady of Runestone herself in person through the TV show. It's no secret that Daemon Targaryen and Rhea Royce did not like each other in the slightest. They never consummated their marriage. Daemon barely spends any time in the Vale either. He regularly cheats on his wife and insults her in public, calling her a bronze bitch, since bronze is very meaningful to the Royces of the Vale. They wear bronze armor with runes etched into them that are supposed to protect the wearer from all harm, yet plenty Royces have died wearing it, like the lady in question. Daemon also compares his wife to a sheep, saying that the sheep are prettier looking.
Lady Rhea is your wife, a good and honorable lady of the Vale.
In the Vale, men are said to fuck sheep instead of women. I can assure you, the sheep are prettier.
Which is clearly not true when you get your first look at Rhea Royce, but with the lengths Daemon goes to get away from her, it does make you wonder, why? Before we can ask the question of what if they had a son, let's first ask why they didn't. Daemon's marriage to Rhea was not his choice. It was made by his grandmother, Alysanne. So I could see why this would be a factor into why he doesn't have any kind of love for her. It wasn't what he wanted, what he chose for himself. But I highly doubt the lack of agency is the sole reason as to why he doesn't like her. He makes it seem like Rhea is such an unbearable person to be around, and we don't really get to see much of her character in the show to determine if she really is such a terrible person, which I honestly doubt. From what we do see of Rhea, she is a very independent person who has no problem doing things for herself, kinda like Daemon, and I believe that is really why Daemon doesn't like her. Not to say he wants a traditional, submissive woman for a wife. In fact, I think he likes the opposite. I believe the reason he doesn't like Rhea is because they're too similar. They're both very independent and have very strong personalities. Daemon likes to play games to get what he wants, and Rhea seems like a very no-nonsense kind of woman, and I believe this is where they clash. Rhea has no time for Daemon's games, and one big thing about Daemon's character that I believe people do not recognize is that he is insecure. Despite being a warrior, a prince, and dragon rider, Daemon has nothing to his name. Like any second son, he has to carve a way for himself in life. So a lot of his character is proving himself, proving he's important, proving that he is needed. This is really exemplified in his relationship with Viserys. Daemon feels threatened by people like Otto, not just because the Hand of the King is a self-interested man. Daemon is also a very self-interested man himself, but because of how close he is to his brother. And this is the same for the king's first son, Balon. Viserys has Otto, so he doesn't need Daemon to be his hand. Viserys has Balon, which means he doesn't need Daemon as an heir. Daemon has no place, and this is why he gets vulnerable with Mysaria later on. He doesn't want to be replaced, he wants to be needed. This plays into why he goes off to the Stepstones. He wants to prove himself, show how good he is on his own. He doesn't need help, the help needs him. This is also why he doesn't take up Viserys' offer on Driftmark.
Damon, I know we've had our differences, but let them pass with the years. There's a place for you in my court. That's something you should need.
I need nothing.
He needs to be needed, not the other way around. And I believe this is why he really doesn't like Rhea Royce. Not because she's unattractive and not because she isn't Valyrian enough. I mean, he sleeps with Mysaria pretty regularly. But then again, she is from Lys, if I'm not mistaken, which was a Valyrian colony at one point. But I don't feel like debating if Daemon is a Valyrian blood purist right now. The point I'm getting at here is Rhea doesn't need Daemon. She doesn't care for his games and isn't falling over herself to keep him around. Daemon wants to be wanted, feel like he has some kind of purpose and that he's irreplaceable. And Rhea doesn't give him that. That sense of importance and security. This dislike is also probably compounded by the fact that despite being prince, Daemon will always play second fiddle to his wife. Lady Rhea is the Lady of Runestone. Daemon is her husband and consort. She is not married to him, he's married to her. So he has virtually no standing in the Vale. And Daemon, especially early on in this series, likes to feel like he has a real important place, and that is not by Rhea Royce's side. And just by looking at how Daemon acts in the show, it's kind of clear why Rhea doesn't like him either. But what if, despite the hate and disdain they have for one another, they were able to look past it, if only for a moment? What if they put their emotions aside for the sake of duty in both of their families? What if their marriage actually bore fruit? What if Daemon Targaryen and Rhea Royce had a son? So with this what if, I'm not going to make some giant gargantuan change saying that Daemon and Rhea actually fell in love with each other in this timeline for this to work. Plenty of people do not love each other romantically and have kids. Alicent and Viserys are a perfect example. Alicent cares for Viserys, but does not love him beyond anything more than a friend, if that, and she ended up giving him 4 kids. But when it comes to Daemon and Rhea, there will only be one. Daemon and Rhea will still hate each other, but they'll set aside their feelings for the sake of duty. The change we'll make instead of their feelings for one another is that in this timeline, while sleeping together is not a regular thing for them, they do actually consummate their marriage like they didn't do in canon. This will take place in 97 AC, the year Rhaenyra was born and Daemon was around 16 years old. We'll say from this one unenthusiastic meeting, Rhea Royce actually gets pregnant with Daemon's child. And this is going to be very big because this is the heir to Runestone, the heir to House Royce, the second most powerful house in the Vale. This child will also have a claim to the Iron Throne through Daemon Targaryen, and through that Targaryen blood, the Royces will now have the ability to claim dragons. So now instead of 2 dragon-riding houses through the Targaryens and the Velaryons, there will be 3, and this could change everything. Obviously, since the butterfly effect, but the son of Daemon and Rhea would be a prime prospect in the world of Westeros. As I said earlier, this would be a new, unwed male with Targaryen blood in his veins, the future lord of a powerful house and a possible dragon rider. And assuming he was born in the year Daemon and Rhea consummated their marriage, or sometime in 98 AC, this means that there is another Targaryen out there in the world around Rhaenyra's age. So Laenor may not be Rhaenyra's only prospect in the future. But I am getting ahead of myself. Before we get into the changes Daemon's son could potentially bring, let's map out his story a little bit and the changes that he could bring to his parents so far. When Daemon's son is born, this is going to be his very first child. And we'll say he names his very first son Maegor, for a few reasons. One, because I really like the name Maegor. It's a really cool Targaryen name, and it's a shame it's never really used again outside of Maegor the Cruel. There's only one other Maegor that I know of after him, hundreds of years later during the time of Aegon V, but we don't know what happened to the son of Aerion Brightflame, how he lived or how he died. If he died. Second reason for this name is because everyone already kind of expects him to be named Balon after Daemon's father, like Viserys named his first son in honor of their father because he died. But in the years 97 and 98, Balon is actually still alive for the time being. The third reason for this is because naming his son something blasphemous definitely seems like something that Daemon would do. Especially a 16-year-old, angsty, more impulsive Daemon that hasn't really grown up yet. Daemon in both the show and book has been compared to Maegor, and he does seem to embody some of his qualities, being a great warrior and primarily using fear as a way to garner respect and loyalty. I could easily see him recognizing that yes, while Maegor's reign was terrible, it was also necessary. People needed to know what happens when you back a Targaryen into a corner. He would see the strength in some parts of Maegor's reign, and respect it to a degree, and want that same strength for his son. And I wouldn't really put it past him because of the way Daemon really idolizes his Valyrian ancestors. The fourth reason I'm naming him Maegor is because I like how it actually fits narratively. Not to say I'm going to drag this out into parts like I did with my What If Rhaenys Killed the Greens videos, but in the event of a story, I like to think it could be an interesting parallel to Aegon. Not the character, but the name. Aegon is a name that is so revered among the Targaryen line. To be named after the Conqueror is like an honor since he was basically Targaryen Jesus to his dynasty. But despite how revered the name is, how much of an honor it seems to have this name, how many Targaryens have this name, monarch or not, there is never an Aegon after the first that actually lives up to his namesake. And I feel like that's a fun narrative idea that could be explored. A Targaryen born with a name that is the opposite of Aegon. It's seen as cursed and ominous, and they have to fight against the preconception that people form about them because of this name. Like Aegon after the first, for different reasons, they don't live up to their namesake. So that's my reasoning for why I'm naming him this. Obviously though, this would be a way bigger deal in the world, considering Maegor's reign wasn't even a century ago. Rhea Royce would not want her son to be named this, because as I mentioned before, Maegor was a monster and the name is seen as cursed. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jaehaerys, who is still alive at this point in 97 to 98, in his old age threw a fit because the original Maegor did kill 2 of his brothers. And this could honestly provide another reasoning for Daemon to name his son this. Maybe Daemon is so pissed at being married off by his grandparents to be some woman's consort, so far from home, in the Vale, basically living in exile, he decides to be petty through his son. Honestly, it wouldn't even surprise me.
I'd gladly give Lady Rhea to you, Lord Hightower, if you're in want of a woman to warm your bed. Your own lady wife passed recently. Did she not?
And while we're on the topic of names, aside from the controversial Maegor, the big question would be, is Maegor born Maegor Targaryen or born Maegor Royce? Well, it is easy to say Maegor Targaryen because Daemon is the father, and by Westerosi law, all children take the father's name. It's important to remember that while he is Daemon's son, he is Rhea Royce's heir. This isn't a situation like the Iron Throne where in order to avoid the ruling family of the kingdoms as a whole being replaced by an entirely different house, they make a compromise. But when you sit down and think about it, it could still end up turning into something like that, because despite the blood in his veins, the Royces wouldn't want their home of Runestone to pass to someone with a different name entirely. And with Daemon's disdain for Rhea, he would probably do everything in his power to make sure his son was born a Targaryen and stayed a Targaryen. This could turn out to be a whole court argument in the world as well. But let's just say, despite whatever grievances Jaehaerys will have with Daemon for what he names his son, we'll say he allows the boy to be born a Targaryen, but when the time comes for him to inherit Runestone, he will do so as a Royce. Something that Daemon isn't happy about, but he deals with it either way. Some other things that would change to the story is that Daemon having a son with Rhea Royce would most likely cause him to spend more time in the Vale. He hated the Vale and Canon did everything he could to avoid being there. But now, despite his antics, he does care about his family. I doubt he'd abandon his son just because he didn't like his mother. On the contrary, I believe it's exactly because he doesn't like his mother that Daemon would be very involved in his son's life. His son is Targaryen, Valyrian, and Daemon idolizes his Valyrian heritage and culture. He would want to make sure his son is properly educated on his true heritage and not sullied by the Vale and his mother Rhea. He doesn't want the bronze to smother his son's fire. This would also be the same with Rhea Royce, I imagine. She would want her son to be as little like Maegor as possible, and definitely not like his father Daemon. So if Daemon had a son with his first wife, I could easily see the two of them fighting over who had more influence over the child. Daemon wanting him to be as Valyrian as possible, and Rhea wanting the opposite, if only to just deny Daemon, which could be an interesting story aspect. I imagine a lot of Maegor's life would be spent going back and forth between the Vale and King's Landing, symbolic of his parents' tug-of-war. If he spends enough time in King's Landing, it's also very likely that he'll become friends with both Alicent and Rhaenyra, since they would all be around the same age, which could be an interesting dynamic. When the show starts, instead of getting a duo, we could get a trio. 2 girls and 1 guy, all around the same age and having known each other since childhood. That's a friendship bound to last with no obstacles whatsoever. But before we get to that bit, let's explore something else. It's custom for Targaryens to get dragon eggs in their cradle. I imagine this will also continue with young Maegor. But like some Targaryens, it does not work. His dragon egg does not hatch. But that's okay because there is more than one way to bind oneself to a dragon. And Daemon isn't going to let an unhatched egg rob his son of his heritage. We'll say that when Maegor turns 13, Daemon gets a pass from Viserys, or sneaks onto Dragonstone past the Dragon Keepers, so his son can claim a dragon that is worthy of him. It's here that young Maegor will claim the dragon, Vermithor, the mount of old King Jaehaerys, and the second largest dragon in the world, the Bronze Fury for the Bronze Dragon. And this would be very big, not just for Maegor, but having a dragon in general. If the son of Rhea Royce, the heir to Runestone, has a dragon, then the Royces have a dragon. House Royce is the second most powerful house in the Vale. With Maegor added to their line through Daemon, they now have dragon blood, and now Maegor is a dragon rider. His kids will also be able to be dragon riders. A child between Damon and Rhea would unofficially raise the status of House Royce as a whole. They'd arguably be more powerful than the Aarons at this point. They'd have one dragon through the heir, and maybe two if Daemon has a sense of loyalty to his son. The Vale could be easy pickings if the Royces wanted to take over. The Eyrie can't defend against dragon attacks. This was proven years ago by Visenya when she conquered the Vale without having to burn a single person. All she did was show up on Vhagar and they knew it was over. And above all of that, the Royces may even have a valid claim to the Vale as well, since years ago, before the Aarons even showed up, House Royce actually ruled the Vale. They were once Bronze Kings, so if they wanted that title back now, who knows what could happen if they chose to pursue it. But let's move on. With all of that out of the way, let's see how some things in Season 1 could change with the addition of Daemon's son. Well, for starters, as I mentioned earlier, assuming that Maegor spends enough time in King's Landing, this would most likely make him friends with both Alicent and Rhaenyra, and this could potentially lead to a romance between them. It may sound corny to some of you, but it would make sense. In canon, we don't see Rhaenyra or Alicent really interact with boys their age. I mean, Rhaenyra does have Criston Cole, but that's years later, and he's in his 20s and she's around 18, I believe. And then Alicent gets married off to Viserys. Introducing Maegor could spice things up a bit. And this could honestly add another layer of tragedy to Alicent's story. She was never really allowed to pursue her own desires in canon. Imagine how it would be now. Imagine having a friend she actually has an interest in, a romance that she wants to pursue, but she's not allowed to do that because, one, her father hates Daemon and would probably prevent his daughter from ever getting involved with his son because he hates his father, and then she's married off to King Viserys, a man old enough to be her father, a man she doesn't want to be with at all. But she has no choice, so she's robbed of her chance at love. And depending on who you ask, this tragedy of not being able to pursue the one she loves might have actually happened in canon, because some people actually theorize that Alicent was in love with Rhaenyra. I don't know about that, but we'll see. Aside from that though, in all honesty, you could take Maegor and have him supplant Daemon as the primary love interest for Rhaenyra. In fact, I even believe that Daemon would push for this. It's only natural that the two lines of Balon the Brave come together at some point. And honestly, it might even be expected by even more people than just Daemon. Maegor is unwed, the heir to Runestone in House Royce, who at this point is unofficially more powerful than House Arryn. Speaking of the Aarons, Rhaenyra is a quarter Arryn herself through her mother Aemma, so they both have roots in the Vale. Their pairing would make a lot of sense, but I could see Otto running interference on this because he doesn't want Daemon to have any kind of power. Just having a son, a male heir, though he has no lands or titles himself, gives Daemon a strengthened claim to the Iron Throne. If his son married the princess, it would be even stronger. So him putting up some kind of obstacle is imperative. But Daemon will do Daemon things and will find a way to get in his own way. Assuming things proceed like canon for a bit, Balon still dies and you have a funeral. Here it was originally Daemon who supported Rhaenyra, but if you're replacing him with Maegor, we'll say he's the one who supports Rhaenyra. He's her cousin, her friend, so we'll say he supports her in this timeline even after the funeral has passed. While Daemon goes to a brothel and toasts to Balon. This will still cause him to get disinherited and sent away. But Viserys is angry at Daemon, not his son. But Daemon likes to play his game, so I imagine he'd find his son to say Viserys wants them both gone, even though that's not true. This will later lead to a more intense confrontation on Dragonstone between Rhaenyra, Daemon, and her cousin. And their dragons, Caraxes, Vermithor, and Syrax, all staring each other down. That seems very terrifying to think about. And with Daemon pulling such dangerous stunts, it does make you wonder, what would his relationship with his son really be like at this age early on in the series? Assuming that Daemon still hates Rhea, and he openly insults her and cheats on her, most likely in front of his son, assuming that Maegor has any kind of love for his mother, I imagine this could be a very big issue in their relationship. But Maegor may or may not do anything about it, or feel like he can because of just how much his parents hate each other. The feeling is mutual between the both of them. He may feel like it's pointless, which sucks, but let's move on from that. After the Balon incident and confronting Rhaenyra, assuming that Corlys seeks Daemon out for help, this could mean that Daemon and Maegor will be in the Stepstones helping him out. Or maybe Maegor will want to go back home. Probably sick of his dad's antics, he just wants to go back to the Vale in Runestone and just live easy for a second. But maybe Daemon finds a way to convince his son to come along, appealing to the dragon within him. Maybe like his father and pretty much every Targaryen in the show, Maegor is insecure, which isn't that far-fetched considering who he's named after, and who knows how many times he has to be reminded of that. In canon, Corlys tells Daemon,
"Waiting in the Stepstones is a chance for you to prove your worth to any who might yet doubt it. We are the realm's second sons, Daemon. Our worth is not given. It must be made."
Perhaps Daemon could tell this same thing to his son, to stop him from going back to the Vale, to his mother, and her influence. Tell him that the Stepstones are a way for him to separate himself from his namesake in a good way. He can make his own legend, his own legacy. Bronze is only tempered in the fire. This could potentially sway his son to his side, and when the time comes, the battle in the Stepstones would have 3 dragons, not 2, and this may cause the conflict to wrap up sooner than it did in canon. Regardless of the Triarchy using the caves to their advantage, having to face down Caraxes, Seasmoke, and Vermithor is not a good look for anyone. And after the conflict wraps up and Daemon is made the King of the Narrow Sea, I doubt this will be the only reward he's offered. Since Corlys and Daemon seem to be kindred spirits and have some kind of alliance going on at this time, I could easily see Corlys wanting to expand on that. Corlys is a very ambitious man like Otto Hightower. If you give him an inch, he will take a mile. He wants power, to be remembered, to make a legacy. In order to achieve this after being rejected by Viserys and wrapping up the conflict in the Stepstones, he wanted his daughter Laena to marry the son of the Sea Lord of Braavos. Here, I imagine this offer of marriage will be extended to Daemon. He has a son. Corlys has a daughter. They should cement their friendship in blood. And a union like that would honestly be very terrifying to think about. A marriage between Maegor and Laena would give the Velaryons influence in the Vale. Not only that, this union would also have the backing of the Velaryon fleet, wealth, and possibly 5 dragons. Caraxes, Meleys, Seasmoke, Vhagar, and Vermithor, the 2 largest dragons in the world. If they wanted to stand in rebellion against the crown, it would be a disaster. But I don't see Daemon taking the offer. He may consider it, but I don't think he'd take it because he loves his brother, despite their differences, and he wouldn't want to rise in rebellion against them. Not to mention, this could also cause issues with Lady Rhea, since Maegor is her heir, not Daemon's, so she might have the last say when it comes to their sons' engagements. But in all honesty, there are just infinite possibilities when it comes to the son of Daemon, more than I'm willing to tackle in this video, but I will give a few more ideas on what could happen. As mentioned before, with Maegor being around, you could completely remove Daemon as Rhaenyra's love interest and replace him as a whole. Instead of marrying Laenor for an alliance, Rhaenyra could marry Maegor. He's a perfect candidate. Assuming that Maegor isn't like Laenor and that he prefers guys, this would mean that all of his children with Rhaenyra would be legitimate from the start, and they would not be the heirs to the Iron Throne and Driftmark, but the heirs to the Iron Throne and Runestone. The Vale would have even more reason to support Rhaenyra's claim to the throne now after this, and maybe with Rhaenyra having legitimate children and her husband being one of their best friends, Alicent might not be so gung-ho about making Aegon the king. Or maybe the opposite could occur. Maybe Alicent will be so jealous of Rhaenyra being with the guy she liked since they were kids while she was forced to marry an old man, she'll decide to be petty and start a war. But with all this talk of marriage, I did neglect to mention one other option for the son of Daemon. When I said that Maegor is a prime prospect earlier on in the video, I meant that. Outside of the main story-changing options like Rhaenyra, Alicent, and Laena, there is also another, Lady Jane of the Vale. Lady Jane is the head of House Arryn, and she came into power when she was around 3 years old. Despite the Arryns overthrowing the Royces years ago, the families are actually really good friends. A Royce was actually the regent for Lady Jane until she came of age. She was born in 94 AC, 3 years before Rhaenyra and the son of Daemon. And with Maegor being a Royce and the Royces and Aerys being so close, it's very likely that the Lady of the Vale and the Bronze Dragon would have grown up together. And with her being only 3 years older than him, the idea of marriage between the two of them might actually be on the table, especially with the Royces gaining power through dragons. They'd be more powerful than the Aarons in all but name, and since they used to rule the Vale before the Aarons came along, there might be some fear that they would want their old title back. So it could be a potential marriage of strategy, and strategy only, since Lady Jane is actually gay like Laenor. She had a lover named Jessamine Redfort, and she never took a husband during her entire time as Lady of the Vale. But with the Royces becoming more dangerous now, she might be willing to go out on a limb and take that vow. Marrying a Royce would give the Royces more power and influence in the Vale, but it would also keep them in check, and it would also strengthen the Aarons, since a marriage between Maegor and Jane could give them dragons in the future. So now there could be 4 dragon riding houses instead of 2 or 3. The dance could get hectic if it still happens in this timeline. There is honestly a lot to be explored with this new timeline, because the potential decisions and alliances are endless when you make a new character like this. Like, for example, one question I didn't even ask in this video is, does Daemon still kill Rhea Royce? There wouldn't be much gain, honestly, since his son would be the heir to Runestone, not him, and he'd be old enough to rule without a regent. He'd have his own mind and may not listen to what Daemon says, unless Daemon decided to kill Rhea when he was still a child for whatever reason, and tried to rule Runestone through his son. But who knows, the possibilities are endless. Either way, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, tell me what you thought in the comments, and I will see you all next time.